There is a specific kind of cold that doesn't just chill your skin, but settles deep into the marrow of your bones. It is a cold born not of the weather, but of the sudden, violent realization that the world does not operate by the rules you thought it did. Even now, years later, I struggle to articulate what happened during that semester abroad. If you had asked me back then, at 22 years old, I would have told you with absolute certainty that the paranormal was a coping mechanism for the gullible. I didn't believe in ghosts, demons, or curses. I believed in concrete reality and things I could touch and prove. I was a cynic, proudly so. Perhaps that arrogance was why it targeted us. Or perhaps we were just in the wrong place, at the profoundly wrong time. I was studying in a picturesque, sleepy town in southern Austria. It was the kind of place framed by jagged alpine peaks and thick, ancient pine forests that seemed to swallow the sunlight by mid-afternoon. My friends, Lena and Marcus, were also exchange students. Lena was a spirited, naturally curious arts major from London, while Marcus was a pragmatist from Chicago, armed with a sarcastic defense mechanism for just about everything. It was late October. The tourist season had died down, leaving the town quiet and, frankly, agonizingly boring on a Tuesday night. We were sitting in my cramped dormitory, nursing cheap local beer, desperate for a distraction. "I'm telling you, it's a real place," Lena said, leaning forward on the edge of my bed. Her eyes gleamed with that specific brand of reckless enthusiasm only 20-somethings possess. "The locals call it Der Alte Bahnhof, the old station." Marcus snorted, tossing a crumpled-up receipt at the trash can and missing. "Every European town has an old station, Lena, or an old asylum, or a haunted castle. It's for the tourists. But this isn't on any map," she countered, pulling up an entirely blank screen on her phone's map app. "It's past the edge of the East Woods, at the end of the rusted tracks that were decommissioned back in the 70s. Some of the seniors were talking about it in the Commons. They say it's perfectly preserved, just abandoned." I sighed, staring at the ceiling. "So, the grand plan is to hike into the freezing Austrian woods at night to look at an empty, graffiti-covered concrete block." "The grand plan," Lena corrected, standing up and tossing my heavy winter coat onto my lap, "is to cure our boredom. Come on, what else are we going to do? Watch German-dubbed reality TV?" Against my better judgment, the promise of exploring a piece of forgotten history and the desire to simply get out of the room won out. We layered up, grabbed a couple of flashlights, and headed out into the biting autumn air. The walk started as a joke. We laughed, our breath pluming in white clouds under the amber glow of the streetlights. But as we reached the eastern edge of the town, the streetlights abruptly ended. The paved road gave way to uneven gravel, and then to the tracks. They were heavily rusted, thick iron veins nearly swallowed by aggressive, thorny weeds and creeping ivy. As we followed them into the tree line, the atmosphere shifted. The transition was so subtle I didn't notice it at first. But a mile into the woods, the ambient noise of the town, the distant hum of cars, the barking of dogs, had completely vanished. It was replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. The trees loomed like dark sentinels, their branches weaving together to block out the moonlight. "Is it just me, or did it drop 10 degrees?" Marcus muttered, his voice losing its earlier bravado. He clicked his flashlight on, the beam cutting through the dense, misty air. "We're almost there," Lena whispered. I wondered why she felt the need to whisper. When the structure finally materialized out of the gloom, my stomach instantly tightened. It wasn't the thrill of discovery, it was a visceral, biological warning. Do not go in there. The building stood entirely alone, an imposing, brutalist block of concrete that looked completely alien against against the natural backdrop of the forest. It was covered in layers of aggressive graffiti, but the colors were all strangely dull, as if the damp air had leached the vibrancy out of the paint. Empty, rusted spray cans littered the cracked pavement near the grand entrance arches. "See?" Marcus said, shining his light on the cans. "Just a hangout spot for edgy teenagers." But as we stepped through the threshold, the theory of edgy teenagers evaporated. The interior of the station was cavernous, smelling heavily of ozone, rotting wood, and wet earth. Our footsteps echoed off the high, vaulted ceilings, but it was the floor that commanded my attention. It wasn't littered with cigarette butts, beer bottles, or modern trash. It was covered in personal artifacts. "What the hell is this?" I breathed, sweeping my flashlight across the ground. There were old, leather-bound suitcases, some bursting open to reveal decaying, moth-eaten clothes. There were damp, swollen books with unrecognizable text, a porcelain doll with a cracked face, and photographs, dozens of scattered, sepia, toned or faded Polaroid photographs. I knelt to pick one up. It showed a family standing in front of a house, but the water damage had blurred their faces into featureless smudges. None of it looked like accidental trash. It didn't look like the aftermath of a robbery, either. It looked as though dozens of people had walked into this station, calmly set down their most precious belongings, and simply walked away. Maybe it's an art installation, Lena suggested. Her voice trembled. She didn't believe it. Neither did I. We tried to laugh it off. Marcus made a weak joke about how we had stumbled onto a hoarder's paradise. We pushed deeper into the station, moving toward the platform that led back out to the tracks. But with every step, a suffocating tension clamped down on us. Have you ever been in a room where someone is intensely, violently angry, even if they aren't speaking? That heavy, electric pressure in the air, the station felt exactly like that. My heart began to race. Without realizing it, I started gnawing fiercely on my thumbnail. I looked over at Marcus. The confident guy from Chicago was aggressively clearing his throat every 5 seconds, his eyes darting frantically into the dark corners. Lena had gone completely mute. It was as if an invisible wave of pure anxiety had washed over us, a hive mind of dread. Suddenly, Lena froze. We were standing on the edge of the passenger platform, looking out at the tree line. "There's someone over there," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her finger shook as she pointed toward the far end of the platform, where the concrete curved into shadow. Marcus swung his flashlight over. The beam illuminated crumbling pillars and rusted metal benches, but nothing else. "It's just shadows, Lee," Marcus said, trying to sound soothing, though his voice cracked. "You're letting the spooky atmosphere get to you. Come on, let's just loop around the back and head home. I've had enough urban exploring for one night." We didn't argue. We hopped down off the platform onto the gravel, intending to walk along the tracks behind the building to circle back. That was when my light caught a splash of color against the iron rails. It was a bright yellow jacket, heavily torn at the shoulder, but it wasn't the jacket that made my blood run cold. Lying directly beside it, half buried in the wet gravel, was a thick, matted clump of hair. It wasn't a few loose strands. It was a dense, heavy handful, ripped out at the root, mixed with something dark and sticky. The sight of it bypassed all logical thought and struck something primal inside my brain. Every alarm bell in my nervous system went off simultaneously. "Oh, God," Marcus choked out, backing away. "Don't touch it. Guys, we need to leave. Right now. We need to go." The low-level nervousness that had plagued us for the last 20 minutes instantly transmuted into stark, blinding terror, and in that exact moment of absolute silence, we heard the footsteps. Skirch, skirch. sounded like heavy boots dragging across the gravel. The sound didn't come from the woods. It came from directly behind us, up on the platform. It was impossibly close. I stopped breathing. Lena let out a muffled sob. Slowly, as if moving underwater, the three of us turned around, expecting to see a homeless person, a security guard, or some hostile local. A man stood on the edge of the platform, looking down at us. He appeared to be middle-aged, dressed in an old-fashioned, heavy wool coat and trousers. But there was something deeply, terribly wrong with his appearance. He looked as if a layer of reality had been peeled away from him. His clothes, his skin, his hair, they were entirely drained of color. He existed in shades of faded gray and dull brown, looking like a living, breathing sepia photograph. His face was entirely devoid of expression. It was a mask of slack flesh. But it was his eyes that shattered my sanity. When you shine a flashlight at a person in the dark, their eyes catch the light. They reflect. This man's eyes did not. They were entirely dull, matte, and light-absorbing, like twin pools of black oil, and they were locked dead onto us. "Hey?" Marcus tried to yell, but it came out as a pathetic croak. "Who are you?" The man did not blink. He did not speak. Then the dragging sound happened again. Scourge. The fear finally broke our paralysis. "Arn!" I screamed, grabbing Lena's arm. We turned and sprinted blindly down the tracks back the way we came. The gravel shifted violently beneath our boots. I tripped, tearing the knee of my jeans, but the adrenaline masked the pain. I scrambled up, my heart pounding so furiously against my ribs that my vision actually blurred. "Keep going! Don't look back!" Marcus roared from beside me, but the human instinct to check your blind spot is overwhelming. As we rounded a bend in the tracks, I cast a desperate glance over my shoulder, expecting to see the gray man sprinting after us. He wasn't running. He was standing perfectly upright, his arms limp at his sides. He wasn't taking strides, yet he was undeniably closer. It was a visual paradox that my brain simply could not process. It was like watching a video skip frames. He was 30 yards away. Then I blinked, and he was 20 yards away. The dragging sound, squirch, squark, echoed through the trees, steady and unhurried, completely mismatched with how fast he was gaining ground. He was closing the distance without moving. Panic became absolute. It tasted like copper in the back of my throat. I pushed my legs harder than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning, branches whipping against my face and tearing my skin. Lena was crying hysterically as she ran, Marcus pulling her along whenever she stumbled. The dragging sound grew louder. It sounded like it was right behind my neck. I could almost feel a freezing void opening up behind me, threatening to swallow me whole if I slowed down for even a fraction of a second. We didn't stop until we burst out of the tree line, collapsing onto the paved asphalt under the glow of the first street lamp. We lay there in the middle of the road, gasping for air, trembling violently, staring back into the pitch black maw of the woods. Nothing came out. No dragging footsteps. No gray man. Just the terrifying, indifferent silence of the trees. It took weeks for the nightmares to subside enough for me to function normally. Lena refused to speak about it, shutting down any conversation Marcus or I tried to start. She transferred back to London at the end of November. A few days before I was scheduled to fly back to the States, I found myself sitting at the bar of a local, dimly lit pub. The bartender, an older man named Klaus, with a thick, graying beard and kind eyes, noticed I was staring blankly into my beer. "You look like a man carrying a heavy stone, my friend," Klaus said in heavily accented English, wiping down the bar with a rag. I looked up at him. I needed to know. I needed some sort of closure before I left this country. "Klaus," I started, my voice tight. "Have you lived here your whole life?" "Born He smiled proudly. What do you know about the old abandoned train station out past the East Woods? Klaus's hand stopped moving. The rag remained pressed against the polished wood of the bar. The jovial warmth vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden, stark paleness. He looked around the empty pub, as if making sure no one else was listening. "Why are you asking about that place?" he asked, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "My friends and we went out there a few weeks ago. We saw something." Klaus leaned in close, his eyes reflecting a profound, ancient discomfort. "Listen to me very carefully, boy," Klaus said, his voice trembling slightly. "You must be mistaken about where you went, or you had too much to drink. I know what I saw, Klaus. The concrete building, the suitcases, the man on the platform." Klaus shook his head slowly, a deep sadness pooling in his eyes. "There is no station," he whispered. "There has never been a station out there. Decades ago, during the war, they laid those tracks to transport timber. But the project was abandoned. The line leads to a dead end in a ravine." I stared at him, feeling the blood drain from my face. No, I stood inside it. We saw the platform." "I am telling you the truth," Klaus insisted, gripping the edge of the bar. "There is only a stretch of rusted rails leading into the dark. But," he swallowed hard, "over the last 50 years, people have gone walking down those tracks. Tourists, teenagers looking for a thrill, and many of them, they do not come back. The police search the woods, but they find nothing. No bodies, no clues, just empty tracks." He leaned back, picking up his rag again, though his hands were shaking. "Whatever you found out there, it wasn't a station. And you are very, very lucky you made it back to the road." I flew home 3 days later. I still live my life as a rational man. I work an office job. I pay my taxes. I try to believe that the world is a place governed by physics and logic. But sometimes, on cold autumn nights, when the wind howls against my window, I am transported back to that suffocating concrete room. I smell the damp earth and decaying leather. I see that torn yellow jacket and the sickening clump of hair. And when I close my eyes, I see him, the man in grayscale, with eyes like black holes, closing the distance between us without ever taking a single step. I don't know what we walked into that night. A memory, a trap, a tear in the fabric of the world designed to lure people in with the illusion of abandoned history. I will never know, but to this day, whenever I approach a railway crossing and look down the long, empty stretch of tracks disappearing into the distance, my heart rate spikes. My chest tightens, and I have to physically force myself not to turn around and run.